All right, welcome back. In this video, we're going to finally get back to using variables, or like we have now seen variables, especially integer types and data types for numbers. But now let's go ahead and actually use it inside of our program here. Okay, so we have our Kotlin basics program that we set up in the last video, and we had this println hello students. Now, what I want to do is I want to set up variables. Okay, and there are two different ways of setting up variables. There is the val and there is the var. So what's the difference between val and var? So the difference is that you use val for constant variables, so to speak, or variables that you cannot change after that, which means, or like the name for it is a immutable reference. So once you assign a value to a val variable, you cannot reassign it. It's essentially a read-only or constant variable. So if I go ahead and create a val, and I'm gonna call it number 1, and I assign 1 to it, I cannot go ahead and reassign number 1 with a different value. So this, for example, doesn't work. I get a compile time error, which means I get an error directly inside of Android Studio without having to execute the code. So that's really good to know. So that's one way of using variables. So immutable variables, so variables that you cannot change after the fact, or like after assigning them once. So adding a value to a variable is assigning the value to that variable. All right, so that's what the terminology here is. So if I want to use a variable that I can change later, so let's call this one my age. All right, and let's say my age is 35 right now, but my age might change later on. So for example, depending on the date of the in the calendar, my age would change a few years, or like every year, right? So then if I want to override my age, I would have to assign a different value to it, for example, 36. So you see here, I'm getting an error, a compile time error, which means an error that our IDE, our Android Studio integrated development environment, directly recognizes and lets me know about it. But then I can see the my age equals 36. I can override it because I'm using var, which is a mutable reference. So allows reassignment. You can change the value of a var variable after its initial assignment. So when creating the variable, that's where you have the initial assignment. And that is basically the difference. So for example, for variables like pi is a constant, so pi doesn't change. It's always been the same. So there val would make sense. But the thing is, by default, Kotlin recommends to use val because it assumes that you're not going to change the value afterwards. But if you want to change the value, you need to use the var keyword. All right, so these are just two different keywords. Good, so that out of the way, let's get rid of this number 1. So you can see that we have my age, and we saw earlier that my age was 35, and now I overrode it, and let me print out my age. So how do I print out my age? Well, I can just go ahead and inside of this println, I can just print out my age. Okay, so I don't have to use these parentheses now because I am passing a variable to println through this function called println. It's a built-in function that we don't have to write ourselves. It's inside of all of the code that Kotlin offers automatically, and it knows what to do with an integer if we pass to it. So if you hover over my age, you can also see the type, because where it says here var my age :int, which just means, okay, my age is of type int. All right, so if I now execute this code, let me run it. Actually, let me rerun it here from the bottom. It's a little easier. And it's going to display 36 because that's what my age is at the moment where I execute this line println. And the code is executed sequentially, so line by line. Obviously, if you have functions that refer to other areas of the code, it will be a little different, but that's something we will see later on. So now let me copy this line, print line, and put it in here after the moment where I initialize my variable to 35, or where I assign the value 35 to it. And I rerun the code. Let me actually also get rid of this empty space. Let me rerun the code, and now I will get 35, and then I will get 36. So the moment that this println statement was executed, this first one, my age was 35, and the next moment, when I reassigned the value, my age was 36. So that's what you can work with when it comes to println and how the println statements is very useful. On this video, you have seen the difference between mutable and immutable variables, so var and val, var being mutable and val being immutable. And you also saw how to print your data directly onto the console. In the next video, we're going to see how we can specify the type manually. All right, see you there.